Have you ever wondered what would be the modern day version of those old creepy porcelain dolls? Well, wonder no more. We have those Funko things, which traded the creepy look and the craftsmanship for a cheap, plastic, exploitative, macrocephalic version of whatever you are a fan of. Have you ever imagined how one of those would look like if they had an emotional meltdown? Of course you have, and here is the answer. You'd get something like the characters of Distraint 1 and 2. A couple of dark, moody and depressed. Almost forgot that YouTube doesn't like that word, because not talking about serious issues is going to make them disappear, surely. Let me rephrase. A dark, moody and big sad couple of games that have been extremely well received, and that you can get right now and on most sales for less than what a coffee will cost you. We are going to talk about both games today, as they are two faces of the same coin. So let's deal with the aesthetic and gameplay aspects to get this thing rolling. Everything is minimalistic in these games. Graphics are beautifully ugly. Most of the effort was put on the backgrounds that tend to be grimy, creaky, rotten. There are particles floating everywhere, liquids bleeding from the cracks. Very nostalgic, as it reminds me of some Airbnbs I've been to. Sound design is ASMR for weirdos. Well, not like people who listen to ASMR is not kind of, you know. But still, the soundtrack is what you'd expect from an abandoned factory full of angry ghost cats. Most of the sounds are creaky, rusty thumps, scratches, moans and static, all designed to create an uncomfortable ambience. There is also a song or two, here and there, sometimes whispering melancholic thoughts at you, sometimes screaming chords at your face. Gameplay is kinda there. You walk left and right, you interact, you pick stuff from your inventory, and that's it. Keep in mind that these games were developed by a single Finnish guy, Jesse Makkonen. I would love to make a joke about Finnish people being moody, but it turns out that apparently Finland has been the happiest country for 5 years in a row, so nowadays they have to look outside to get inspiration for their disturbing creations, while saying a sad "perkele" when they see how the rest of the world is doing. These are dark games, and I love that he chose such a weird, almost dumb aesthetic to build up his style of horror. It fits the tone very well, as we'll be sinking into very deep, disturbing thoughts, but never forgetting to keep a twisted sense of humor besides us. I love horror, but I have to admit that I'm a complete noob at horror games, and I'm going to try to fix this on this channel. I usually tend to prefer horror books rather than movies or otherwise, as visual media tends to focus on shocking us instead of making us feel dread. Shocking is very easy. Grab your car, park it on a street, and whenever someone walks near to you, smack the klaxon and see them jump. Well, don't, or at least, if you do not blame me. As a matter of fact, if I just lower the music and start to dim the image, your brain was probably starting to expect a jumpscare. That's how common this trope has become. Horror is different to a cheap scare. Horror stays with us, and it doesn't even need to shock us. A scare is what you get when you hear a vase crashing and you didn't expect it. Horror is what a kid who lives on a terrible household feels when he crashes the vase. And here, in these games, we experience the horror Mr. Price went through when his emotions ate him. Distraint is true horror in my opinion. And a very interesting way to show how our choices can destroy us if we disregard our mental health. Now I'm going to spoil the first game, so it's the moment where you might want to pause the video, play the games, and then come back to tell me how my perspective is all wrong. Otherwise, I'll try to keep most of it ambiguous, so your playthrough will still have surprises. And I'm going to let this train too, mostly unspoiled, so you can explore it yourself. We play as Mr. Price, a lawyer that is climbing to become a partner at McDade, Bratton and Moore. He has to do 3 more jobs to get there, and his business is to evict people from their homes, but he's starting to develop a conscience just now, which is not the best of ideas. Our first job is to evict Mrs. Goodwin, who seems like a pretty nice, delicate lady. Something cracks in Price while evicting her, and the world shatters with him, cutting his exit when he wants to leave the most, and then things start to get strange. A door falls and we find a very big fan of Kurt Cobain, who seems to wear the same suit as we do. From now on, we stop knowing what's what. Is this a nightmare? Is this purgatory? Who the hell saves keys in ice cubes? Where did the shotgun kisser go? Did I feed my cat today? So many questions and so little answers. The game will have us unraveling several days through this messed reality and trying to solve the small puzzles that will let us continue down the spiral of darkness that consumes Price. By the way, do you believe that your boss is obnoxious? Well, look at these three. They even have a soundtrack. They are the personification of greed, and Price wants to be there, but now he's starting to feel, well, the Price. We'll start to see that there is an elephant in the room, as subtle as a sledgehammer to the face, so we run away, and that wakes Price up. A nightmare then? We might want to ask that to Price's dead parents, who stole his coffee, which is one of the cardinal sins in Finnish culture. Not only that, they'll criticize his home, which is fair enough given the state of it, and treat him like a greedy twat moments before he has to leave to his second job. Small details like blood raining out of the window or things crossing the corner of our vision might go unnoticed by many and are everywhere. So, the second eviction, we go to the house of a guy who lives in the forest. I can empathize. He has no debt, but the city wants his property. Sadly, I also have been there too. The guy looks like a nice fella, and we learn that Price is the kind of man that's willing to smell a dog bed for his job. And that's quite the deal given how creepy this dog is. Here is where you'll start to notice that Price is a bit pathetic, and since we are seeing him through his own cracks, that's how he sees himself. This time he'll even dance at the tune of their song when the bosses demand it from him, like a sad trained circus monkey. Everything looked even worse this second time, messier, bloodier. You can almost feel his mind spiraling and splattering on the environment as he sinks on his own pool of guilt. It won't get better for him as a call wakes us. Mrs. Goodwin had a stroke at her nursing home and we appear to be her contact. Not only that, his caffeine withdrawal will grow even more as his dead parents are back to nag at him while stealing his coffee one more time. By now, they have become his conscience and are telling him that he is losing himself. The nursing home is a nightmare. Part ruined, part aseptic, part rotten. The worst version of a place where the elderly are sent not to be cared for, but to be stored in the hopes they die sooner rather than later. A machine that eats those who should be cared for, quite literally in this case. A system that forgets they are human, while they themselves forget everything in front of the TV. Mrs. Goodwin asks for us, as she has nobody else. She just wanted to see a familiar face before she passes away, which breaks Price a bit more. But there is one more job to do, one more distraint, so he ignores his feelings and continues. The last one is Mr. Jones. He's building a dilapidated, rotten and rundown place that seems to be used as a drug lab. And here, our only way to advance is to inhale the green fumes from the lab that will let us see a different side of reality, which potentially shows how Price was trying to numb his own pain. Mr. Jones is the opposite from Mrs. Goodwin. He's the kind of tenant that threatens to destroy the house if he doesn't get what he wants. In this case, a last party with a live band. But given the status of the house, that's something that he almost already did. With a bit of elbow grease and calling some favors, we managed to get the band to play and Price trips it out at the party. The next day, we suddenly wake. A disgusting noise calling us from the kitchen. This time, his dead parents are chopping the elephant, his guilt, and they tell him that he should eat it. He screams them away. At least they don't take his coffee, and he can read the paper. It's his free day after all. But hey, misery comes in pairs, so he finds Mrs. Goodwin in the obituaries. That's the last straw. He decides to quit, but before, he'll visit her one last time. Finally, after talking to her grave, and with his courage built, he goes to quit, but his bosses are nowhere to be seen. He finds more proof or more delusions that show how cruel his bosses are, or at least how he imagines them, which makes his psyche sleep even more until finally he finds them. The whole company, as a matter of fact. They have prepared a surprise party where he is made partner, and paraphrasing Price, his backbone snapped like a dry stick. So he kept working there for years until he shattered completely and was fired. And here we are, maybe in the present, where the new guy is noticing Price that he'll have to leave his house in a month. And after the new guy leaves, Price, now a disheveled, broken alcoholic, picks his shotgun, and the moment we see the new kid leave the building, the game ends with a bang. Originally, there were no plans for a Distraint 2 according to the developer, so this was the intended ending for the story. which took balls in a world of happy endings. But years passed, and I guess he probably thought that Mr. Price needed a bit of redemption, so we got Distraint too. And I'm not going to spoil this one. Let's just say that all has improved a notch. Graphics and animations are more fluent and dynamic. There are more environments and there is more music, while retaining the same creepy feeling. If Distraint 1 is guilt and self-hatred, Distraint 2 is about healing when you are at the bottom. Price starts in a park bench, darkness engulfing both sides of the path. He's confused, knowing he shouldn't be here. He shouldn't be at all. But a vagabond breaks his line of thought, calling himself reason and telling us to find hope. We still don't know where we are, maybe a delusion, maybe purgatory, that hasn't changed. What has changed is that we'll start to ping-pong between the darkness of his thoughts and tiny islands of peace, which gives the game a better pacing overall. This makes Distraint 2 a more introspective story, where Price's nemesis will be no other than his own emotions, a trip down his memories and trauma while trying to grasp a last strand of hope. It is probably the trippiest interpretation of self-healing I've seen around, and while it swings between twisted and cheesy, I still like it a lot. And if any of what I've said so far clicks with your taste, you'll probably like these games too. They are not perfect, there are some negatives too. They are barely games. More interactive stories than anything else. And I'd have loved to see more complex puzzles, as most of the time they just felt like a way to string us around into letting the environment tell its story. They were way too simple. I also believe that the viewpoint can be a bit childish. The bosses are extremely evil, Mrs. Goodwin extremely good. I kinda forgive this, as I believe it's the perspective of Price, and not necessarily the perspective of the author, but I have to admit that I'd have preferred to see a muddier shade of grey instead of the black and white we got. After all, we don't know anything about Mrs. Goodwin. She might have been a terrible person. She might have made her money selling crack to kids, but got out of business when Fortnite came out. And maybe the owner of the house was another old person who needed that rent to survive. Who knows? Evictions are horrible. They ruin lives, but sometimes not evicting someone might ruin lives too. This is an extremely complex issue, and I believe it's cheapened a bit here. There are shades and shades of grey, and I don't mean the kinky kind. Well, those two, why not? I believe that the story would still have worked if Price was torn between if what he was doing was acceptable or not, as that is also a horrible position for someone highly emotional. To end all this, I'd recommend you wholeheartedly to give these games a go if you have a taste for dark stories and dark humor. Both games will only steal an afternoon from your time, and it is an experience you'll probably remember for a while. Thank you for watching, have a great day, night, or whatever time you're at, and I hope to see you around.